My toxic family didn't wait until after my grandmother was buried. They chose the front pew of a quiet Midwestern church under stained glass and hymns about forgiveness to humiliate me in front of everyone who had ever known my name. They said I hadn't visited enough, that I'd been selfish, that I only cared about myself. My uncle actually stood up during the reception and said, "Some people show up when there's money involved." 40 people turned to look at me like I was stealing from a coffin. What they didn't know was that my grandmother had trusted me with something before she died, and I had proof they were the ones who should be ashamed. The church smelled like lilies and furniture polish, the kind of smell that sticks to your clothes and follows you home. My grandmother's photo sat near the altar, her smiling in that soft cardigan she wore every winter, the one with the pearl buttons. She looked peaceful in the picture, kinder than the room felt. I sat in the second row, not the first. That was intentional. The first pew was occupied by my Uncle Robert, my Aunt Diane, and my parents. They formed a solid line of black suits and controlled expressions. Grief, but curated, controlled, presentable. I hadn't been back to Ohio in almost a year, after a series of family arguments about money, about priorities, about my so-called independence. I had created distance. I moved to Seattle. I stopped answering late-night guilt calls. I refused to co-sign a loan my uncle wanted for a business opportunity. That was apparently my greatest crime. The service began normally. Scripture, hymns, stories about my grandmother's kindness, about how she baked for neighbors and sent birthday cards to every grandchild. When it came time for family reflections, my uncle stood up first. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, looked straight at me before he began. "Mom believed in family above everything," he said. "She believed in showing up, in sacrifice, in loyalty." The words themselves were harmless. The tone wasn't. He spoke about how some people forget where they come from, about how success can make you selfish, about how older generations are often neglected by younger ones chasing careers in big cities. People shifted in their seats. He didn't say my name. He didn't need to. I felt it immediately, that familiar tightening in my chest, the narrative forming, the subtle reframing. By the time he sat down, I wasn't a grieving granddaughter. I was the ambitious one who left. At the reception in the church basement, the whispers got louder. My cousin leaned in and said, "You know she asked about you a lot." The implication hanging there, like smoke. Asked about me, not that I called her every Sunday, not that I paid for her prescription when my uncle's business struggled, not that I was the only one who helped her set up online banking so she could stop asking for rides to the branch. No, just that she asked about me. Then my Aunt Diane said it out loud. "Well," she sighed loudly near the coffee urn, "at least you made it in time for the reading." The reading. I hadn't even known there would be one. "Reading of what?" I asked. She smiled in a way that wasn't friendly. "Mom's letter." That's when I understood. This wasn't just grief. This was setup. For months before my grandmother passed, there had been tension about her will. She owned her small home outright. She had savings, nothing extravagant, but enough to matter in a family where money was always tight. My uncle had helped manage her finances the last year. My parents supported him. I was too far away to be involved. Too far away. Even though I was the one who called her when she forgot her passwords, when she couldn't understand her statements, when she wanted someone to explain why certain withdrawals didn't make sense. She had sounded confused that day. She had said, "I think I signed something I didn't mean to." I asked my uncle about it. He told me to stay out of it. Now, standing in that basement with stale sheet cake and paper cups of coffee, I felt the weight of their confidence. They thought the letter would confirm their version of events, that it would subtly shame me again, that it would reinforce the idea that I had abandoned her. My father approached me quietly. "You didn't have to make this about you," he said under his breath. I hadn't spoken. "You've caused enough drama already." Drama, that word again. I looked around the room at people who had known me since childhood, neighbors, family friends, church members. They were watching, waiting, waiting for confirmation that I was the selfish one. What they didn't know was that 3 weeks before my grandmother passed, she had asked me to come see her privately, and that visit had changed everything. She had given me something, not money, not jewelry, something far more dangerous. And my toxic family had absolutely no idea I was holding it. 3 weeks before my grandmother passed, she called me late at night. It wasn't one of her usual cheerful check-ins. Her voice sounded thinner, like she was measuring every word. She asked if I could fly in for the weekend. "I need to talk to you in person," she said. Not about her health, not about family gossip, just talk. I booked the flight the next morning. When I arrived at her house, the curtains were half drawn, even though it was noon. The place felt smaller than I remembered, quieter. She hugged me tightly, longer than usual, like she was bracing herself. We sat at the kitchen table where she used to roll pie dough, and she slid a folder across to me. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't some movie-style reveal, just a simple manila folder with a rubber band around it. "I don't think everything is right," she said carefully, "and I don't want you fighting with anyone. I just want the truth somewhere safe." Inside were printed bank statements, handwritten notes, and copies of documents she didn't fully understand. There were transfers she didn't remember authorizing, withdrawals that didn't match her explanations, a refinancing document she swore she had never agreed to. My uncle's name appeared more than once. She wasn't accusing him directly, she didn't use the word theft, but her confusion said everything. "I might be wrong," she whispered. "He's been helping me. I don't want to think badly of him." That was her nature, always giving the benefit of the doubt. I didn't promise to confront anyone. I didn't promise to fix it. I promised to keep the folder safe, to look into it quietly, to protect her dignity. Before I left that weekend, she held my hands and said something that stayed with me. "They're going to say you didn't care. Don't let them make you doubt yourself." At the time, I thought she meant emotionally. I didn't realize she meant strategically. Back in the church basement, standing near the folding cables and coffee urns, I watched my uncle laugh loudly with two family friends, confident, relaxed, as if he had already secured whatever outcome he wanted. The reading was scheduled later that afternoon in a private room at the funeral home. Immediate family only. That phrase always sounds harmless. Immediate family. But in families like mine, it means hierarchy. It means power. When we gathered in that small room, the air felt different, less performative, more tense. My uncle sat closest to the attorney. My parents flanked him. I sat across from them, the folder in my purse pressing against my hip like a quiet reminder. The attorney was calm, methodical. He began with standard language: assets, liabilities, sentimental bequests, jewelry to certain cousins, furniture pieces labeled for specific grandchildren. Then he paused. He said, "There is also a written statement your grandmother asked to be read aloud." My uncle's jaw tightened slightly. The attorney unfolded a page. "My dear family," he began, "if you are hearing this, it means I am no longer here to explain myself. I have tried my best to treat each of you fairly, but I am not naive. I know tensions exist. I know money can change how people behave." The room stilled. She went on to say that she had reviewed her accounts personally in her final weeks and had made adjustments to ensure fairness, that any prior documents signed under confusion were to be disregarded in favor of her final, notarized version. My uncle shifted in his seat. The attorney continued, explaining that the house would not be solely transferred to him, as previously filed. It would instead be split between grandchildren in equal shares. Silence. Equal shares. My uncle's face flushed. "There must be a mistake," he said immediately. "We handled everything together." The attorney shook his head. "This version was filed directly by your mother with updated documentation." I didn't smile. I didn't look triumphant. I just watched. Because here was the part they didn't expect. The attorney added a clause requesting that any financial discrepancies identified within the past 12 months be reviewed by an independent auditor before final distribution. That was new. That wasn't in the older draft. That was added after my visit. My uncle laughed nervously. "Discrepancies? What discrepancies?" The attorney simply replied, "Your mother requested the review herself." The room felt heavier. My father glanced at me for the first time that day, suspicion flickering behind his eyes. Because now the narrative was wobbling. I still hadn't spoken. I didn't need to. The humiliation they tried to place on me in the pews had quietly shifted direction. But this wasn't over. Because while the will reading planted doubt, the real damage wasn't in what my grandmother wrote, it was in what I brought with me, and they still didn't know how much I knew. The room didn't explode after the will was read. There was no dramatic shouting, no overturned chairs. It was worse than that. It was quiet, controlled, the kind of silence that forces people to think. My uncle tried to recover first. He leaned back in his chair and forced a laugh. "Mom must have been confused near the end," he said. "You know how memory goes." The attorney didn't respond. He simply adjusted his glasses and closed the folder. My father looked at me again, this time not with dismissal, with calculation, because they both knew something had changed. The humiliation they tried to stage at the church wasn't working anymore. The narrative was slipping. I reached into my purse slowly, not to shock them, not to perform, just to participate. "I think Grandma knew exactly what she was doing," I said calmly. My uncle's eyes narrowed. "What are you implying?" I placed the manila folder on the table between us. For a moment, no one touched it. "These are copies of her statements from the last year, the ones she asked me to keep safe." My aunt inhaled sharply. I didn't want to believe there was anything wrong, but there are withdrawals she didn't recognize, transfers that don't match what she thought she signed, and a refinance document filed 3 months before she told me she was confused. My uncle's face lost color. "That's ridiculous," he snapped. "You're twisting things." "I haven't accused you of anything," I replied. "I'm just honoring the audit she requested." The word audit hung in the air like a threat. He looked at my father for support. My father avoided eye contact. Because now it wasn't about me being selfish. It wasn't about me missing Sunday dinners. It wasn't about me being too busy for family. It was about numbers, and numbers don't respond to emotional manipulation. "You're trying to embarrass us," my uncle said quietly, anger replacing confidence. "No," I said. "You did that yourself when you tried to humiliate me in front of 40 people upstairs." That was the first time I referenced the church, the first time I connected the dots out loud. I stood in a pew and implied I only showed up for money, but if we're going to talk about money, let's talk honestly. My mother finally spoke. "This is inappropriate." Inappropriate was accusing me at my grandmother's funeral. This is accountability. The attorney cleared his throat. "If there are concerns, the audit will clarify them. That's what it's for." My uncle's jaw tightened. He understood what that meant. Independent review, paper trails, signatures, dates, digital timestamps, truth. The power dynamic in that room shifted completely, not because I yelled, not because I cried, but because I stopped absorbing blame. For years, I had been the easy target, the ambitious one, the distant one, the one who thought she was better. They built their comfort on that version of me, but that version required my silence, and I wasn't silent anymore. When the meeting ended, my uncle avoided my eyes. My father didn't say a word. My aunt lingered behind, her voice softer than it had been all day. "Did you really help her with her accounts?" she asked quietly. "Yes," I said. She nodded slowly, like pieces were rearranging in her mind. Upstairs in the parking lot, relatives were still milling around. Conversations were quieter now. Looks were different, not accusatory, curious. The smear campaign had cracks in it. My cousin approached me near my car. "I didn't know," she said. "I know," I replied, because that was the truth. Most of them didn't know. They had been told a story, a simple one: the selfish granddaughter who left, the uncle who sacrificed, the grieving parents trying to hold things together. It was cleaner that way. But grief doesn't erase accountability, and loyalty doesn't excuse exploitation. I didn't celebrate that day. I didn't feel victorious. My grandmother was still gone. The lilies still smelled heavy. The church still felt suffocating. But one thing had changed. They tried to humiliate me in a funeral, in front of a coffin, under stained glass and hymns about grace. They thought shame would silence me. Instead, it forced the truth into the open. By the time the audit finished weeks later, the numbers spoke louder than I ever could. Adjustments were made, explanations were demanded, and the same relatives who stared at me in that pew started asking different questions. My toxic family wanted to bury the narrative with my grandmother. They didn't expect her to leave me the one thing they feared most: documentation. They tried to humiliate me in public, but the only thing that died that day wasn't my reputation, it was their control. If your own family stood in a church and tried to rewrite your story in front of everyone, would you stay silent or would you let the truth speak? Have you ever been blamed for something you didn't do just to protect someone else's reputation? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you believe truth always comes out eventually, make sure you like and subscribe because the next story might hit even closer to home.